The night my husband tried to destroy my life. He believed I had nothing left. What he didn't know was that the truth sitting quietly in an old dusty photo album would soon take everything away from him. My name is Carolina Diaz, and 3 years ago I was living what most people would call a simple life in Spokane, Washington. Our apartment overlooked Riverfront Park. It wasn't large, but every morning sunlight spilled through the big windows and filled the living room with warm light. For me, that light meant everything, because sitting near that window every day was my 5-year-old son. Eduardo was born with cerebral palsy. The doctors told us the truth early. He would never walk. He would likely spend his entire life in a wheelchair. But to me, he wasn't a burden. He was my entire world. For years, my husband Daniel and I tried to make life normal for him. Daniel was a brilliant programmer who eventually built his own internet services company. For a while, things were good. Very good. We had money, stability, hope, and then everything collapsed. It started with Daniel's mother. One evening he walked into the living room and stood silently near the door. The TV light flickered across his face, and I noticed tears rolling down his cheeks. "My mom passed away," he said quietly. Just like that, a stroke. Sudden. Unexpected. Daniel had grown up in a small rural town about 3 hours outside Spokane. His mother Eleanor had lived in the same little house her entire life. She was the type of woman who knew every neighbor and baked bread for half the town. The funeral was full of people, neighbors, old friends, strangers who simply wanted to say goodbye. The next day, Daniel and I drove to the house to collect her belongings. The drive was long and quiet. He barely spoke. When we arrived, the house felt frozen in time. Old wallpaper, wooden windows, photographs everywhere. We packed several bags of clothes, old documents, and photo albums. Nothing looked important. At the time, none of us realized that hidden among those old papers was something that would completely change my life. When we returned home, Daniel said he needed time to grieve. But grief wasn't the only thing waiting for him. Only a few weeks later, Daniel's company was hit by a devastating cyber attack. Their main software system stopped working overnight. Clients demanded refunds, contracts collapsed. Within 2 months, his entire business was gone. Watched my husband crumble. He stopped leaving the apartment. He stopped sleeping. Then he started drinking. At first, it was just beer. Then vodka. Day after day, he sat in the living room staring at the television with a bottle beside him. I tried everything to help him, but nothing worked. Eventually, Daniel pulled himself out of it and found a job at another tech company in downtown Spokane. I thought the nightmare was over, but I was wrong. Something about him had changed. He became distant, cold. He spent hours texting someone on his phone. Whenever I entered the room, he would quickly lock the screen. One evening, I was making coffee in the kitchen when he walked in. "Honey, could you pass me the milk?" I asked. He handed it to me, and then suddenly said something that made my heart drop. "Stop calling me honey." I stared at him. "Just call me Daniel." That was the moment I knew something was terribly wrong. A few minutes later, he sat across from me at the table and said the words that shattered my world. "There's someone else." He said her name was Isabel, his supervisor at work. According to him, she understood him in ways I never did. He packed a bag that night. Before leaving, he said something I will never forget. "I'm tired of you. I'm tired of this apartment. I'm tired of our life." Then he walked out the door. Just like that. For weeks after that, I felt like I was living underwater. Daniel came back only once to collect the rest of his belongings. He packed his clothes into black trash bags and left without even looking at Eduardo. He didn't ask about his son. Not once. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. He left the apartment to us. But that didn't make things easier. The hardest part was seeing photos of him online. Daniel smiling, Daniel hugging his new girlfriend. Daniel living a new life as if we had never existed. Meanwhile, I was barely surviving. Between Eduardo's medication and rent, money was disappearing quickly. One afternoon, while cleaning the apartment, I noticed the bags we had brought back from Daniel's mother's house months earlier. I had completely forgotten about them. So I sat on the living room floor and began sorting through the contents, old shirts, photographs, family albums. Then I found something strange tucked inside. A photo album, a folded document. When I opened it, my hands began shaking. It was Eleanor's will, and it left everything to me. Not to Daniel, to me. Her house, her savings, everything there. Was even a handwritten note beside it. I leave everything to my daughter, Carolina. It read, "My grandson Eduardo deserves protection. His mother will care for him better than anyone." I could barely breathe. The next day my friend Josefina came over with her husband Leonardo, who happened to be a judge. Leonardo reviewed the document carefully. "It's legitimate," he said. "Daniel has no claim if the will is valid." Within a few months the inheritance process was complete. The small village house became mine, and Eleanor had quietly saved nearly $80,000. For the first time since the divorce, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief, but Daniel soon discovered the truth. And when he did, he lost his mind. One afternoon I drove to the village to check on the house. As the taxi pulled up, I saw a man sitting on a bench near the gate. At first I didn't recognize him. His clothes were dirty, his hair greasy. But when he stood up and spoke, I felt my stomach drop. "Why are you here?" Daniel asked. He smelled strongly of alcohol. "This is my house." I looked him directly in the eyes. "No," I said calmly. "It's mine." He began shouting, saying I stole his childhood, saying I stole his mother. But the truth was simple. Eleanor had known exactly who her son really was. She had protected her grandson instead. Daniel eventually stormed off. I thought that was the end. I was wrong again. A few nights later, my phone rang. It was Daniel. "Open the door," he said. My blood ran cold. "I'm already in the building." He began kicking the apartment door. I called the police, and within minutes they arrived. Daniel was arrested in the hallway, drunk and screaming. That night changed everything. A few months later, he was sentenced to several years in prison for attempted assault and breaking into the building. For the first time in a long time, life became quiet again. Eduardo and I eventually moved into Eleanor's house. It wasn't large, but it was peaceful. And every morning when sunlight fills the small kitchen, I remember something Eleanor once told me. Life always reveals who people truly are. Daniel revealed himself, but so did she. And thanks to her, my son and I finally have a future.